like next year we'll make an announcement trailer and start showing things more, and hopefully get out there a little bit, because nobody really knows about the game. It's just, completely unknown at this point because there's not been much promotion. Infinitesimals is a game where you play as a 1mm tall alien.
Thank you guys for coming back to Cobra TV, and we've got an exciting episode for you today. We've got Qubit Studios on to talk about Infinitesimals, the game that we featured on Cobra TV, about 2 weeks ago, and it's just absolutely amazing. We have James here, who is making the game, and to tell us all about it. How you doing, James?
I'm very good. And yourself?
I'm doing great. I got a little bit of a cold, and people can tell that I'm a little nasally right now, but other than that, I'm doing good.
I'm the same. I don't normally have as deep a voice as this. This is a sore throat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
and you know what? I talk to people from all around the world, and there's one thing that, like, everybody across this planet's getting sick right now.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah. It's crazy, and it's like the same type of cold. I don't know how you're feeling, but everyone I talk to is like a runny face, like a cough, or just like a cold. It's not really too bad, but it's just draining.
Yeah, I think it's the time of the year, and you end up seeing people, and that stuff gets around, I guess.
Right, yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so for the people that don't know what Infinitesimals is, give us a brief description about what it is, and we'll get into the specifics later.
Infinitesimals is a game where you play as a 1mm tall alien. You're on foot for a portion of the game, but there's also a vehicle aspect to it where you have this cable-legged, it's called the pod, but it's essentially a robot that has cables for legs, kind of muscular hydrostats, so they're a bit like tongues.
Right.
That's kind of the idea behind the technology, the made-up technology at least. And so play quite a large part of the game in the sense that you have the pod, but you also have a drop ship that you can use to you can climb the pod into it, and then you can transport around in this flying drop ship. That's kind of that's a ornithopter, so it's got wings that flap.
Yes.
So it's a little amazing. Bit. Yeah, it's pretty huge compared to the character. So because it has to fit the pod in, well, it can fit. And it's kind of used as a support platform as well. So you'll be able to give it orders to sort of say, if you go out in the pod and you're in the mission area, you could tell it to just circle, and it's kind of there where you can utilize its sensors, and you can call in strikes from it, like airstrikes.
Oh wow!
It's stuff like that. So you can say, "Oh, I'm under attack. Here's an enemy. Put a barrage down on him, and it will, fire some missiles off, and they'll come down." And so there's a little bit of a tactical vehicle combat side to it, where I think my inspiration would be. Don't know if you ever played a game, it's old now, but Mech Warrior 2, the original from on the PC.
Okay.
The sim, a vehicle simulator.
Right, yeah.
So there's that side of it. And then there's the on-foot stuff, which is a little bit more... That's where you get out, and it's... there's the action-adventure side, where you can, of course, get into combat on foot. Little bit more of an element there where you're a lot more vulnerable, but on the other hand, you can be very stealthy on foot. You're not leaving much. You're not leaving much in the. You're not leaving emissions, and you're not using your sensors. The pod, if you're in the pod or if you're in the dropship, there's an aspect there where you can kind of choose to be more stealthy or less stealthy by using sensors that are active. That gives you a lot of information, but it also sends out the enemies can detect. So
you're an alien from another planet, and
yes.
You're super small, and you go to Earth. Why are we on Earth when we're playing this game?
Okay, so when I first, the actual story that I had in mind is kind of very big compared to what's being focused on for the first game. So I decided, just for sanity reasons in terms of the scale of development, to pick a slice of the story that was kind of not at the start of what I had actually planned out. So we start on like approaching Earth, and later on we'll be explaining how you ended up getting to Earth and what happened to get you there. So it's but yeah, I mean, the kind of the gist of it is that you're escaping from a calamity in your own home.
Awesome.
Everything's gone wrong over there, you know.
Yeah, and so you're looking for a new place to live and populate.
A way that it's kind of more, not necessarily a populate as in like taking over. It's more that there's kind of there was a legend of previous your solar system that went out and were never heard from again. But that's not entirely true. What you kind of discover is that they actually did find Earth, and they more sort of set up facilities here to kind of it was more scientific in nature, like to observe and to, more in terms of exploration. But when everything goes wrong at home, like a last ditch thing is like, let's follow where they went and go where they went, and we don't know what happened to them, but where else could we go?
I see. Wow.
You end up on Earth, and in a long time since they went there, so they've had time to kind of build infrastructure. But not only that, but of the group of you that went to escape, one of the aspects is that you didn't all take off at the same time.
Okay.
And so there's a kind of disparity of when you end up reaching Earth. The people that headed off before you actually had a much better to get to Earth, so they got there much quicker. The guys that you play had to really work hard to use orbital dynamics to get where they needed to go.
Right.
And so what also happens is just the speed that they're traveling. They don't have warp speed. They don't have that kind of stuff. I very much wanted it to be quite grounded in, they have to use
regular propulsion.
Yes. Yeah. It's not too out there,
Right.
But one of the consequences of this is that time dilation has had a huge effect, and so time that you've traveled, you've been traveling really fast, but you've had to kind of scoot round longer than the others, and so by the time you get there, it's been 100 years, since they landed.
Wow.
So when you get there, you kind of come into a situation, you're like, why is everything like this? And that's when you kind of come across the hunter-gatherers, they're called, which is the big enemy machines that really don't seem to like you very much.
Yeah, they want to stomp your face.
Yes,
squish your face.
Yes, exactly. So your first thing, you're going to come across them, and the first game really is going to be about kind of coming into that situation, bit of a mystery there, and trying to unravel the mystery of where everyone that you were following has gone, and why are there these big stompy robots there instead that seem to be hell-bent on destroying you. Kind of the ruins of your guys, or the very first people that went there, you'll kind of come across, but you don't know where they are. And so yeah, the first game's really like building up and establishing the setting and kind of getting into the mood of what's going on, and it's kind of like almost a little bit of a we're setting up a mystery which will be continued to be expanded upon, and you'll find out more, and ultimately to find out what the situation is, where everyone's gone, and what's happened to everyone.
So you're going to have to go through and like discover it like it's lore.
Yeah, very much. I love story. I love games that have stories. So for me, it's always about having a strong narrative, but I want to give to the player, so it's not going to be. It's kind of a happy medium.
Right. So you're not saying this is the path you have to follow, and this is a story I'm going to tell you in this order. It's pretty much kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, like No Man's Sky's got a lot of story. We talk about No Man's Sky a lot on Cobra TV.
Right.
And the way you uncover that story is by just exploring the story. You'd have to go to this monolith and you have to read the lore from there, you know, and you just piece it all together as you're exploring. Is it going to be sort of like that? Like it's not directly told to you, you have to go out there, you have to seek it and learn it?
I think, yes. I think it's probably going to be perhaps a little more pointed than something like No Man's Sky. I think I think if it's too loose for me, I tend to find it's not games that are a little bit too sandbox for me.
Right.
I become a bit lost in them. I think I prefer games that have sandbox, but also have. I mean, I suppose actually a good example would be something like Skyrim.
Okay.
It's got that open world aspect where you can go and do what you want.
Right.
And you give the player freedom within it, but it's still got a line that has people to talk to, events that occur, and key events that you can, get to.
Okay.
So the actual scope of it in terms of how it is and how structured it is, that's still up a little bit for debate.
Okay.
But player freedom is definitely a big one in terms of a good example would be one of the objectives I would like to sort of aim for is you're never told someone, for instance. The choice to kill someone is always down to the player.
I gotcha.
Okay. If you want to take the path of violence, that's the player's choice. You simply you might be given an objective like find out this or go and get this. Go about doing that. I really want that to be up to the player. If you want to go in and kick the door down and kill everyone, you can do that. And maybe there's another option where you could just get it another way by talking to someone. So
I see. Awesome. That's given the player the choice on how their game's going to play out. I like that. I do.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and anyone else's history as well that working with you on the game. Now, I know it was just you for a long time, and now it's two of you. But yes. Let's start before Infinitesimals here real quick. What got you to this point? Like, what is your history on schooling, other projects? What led you to this point with Infinitesimals?
So I didn't really do very well in school. In fact, I was really bad in school. And I hated school. Really despised it.
I like so how you just stamped down on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, I was academically, I'm a complete failure.
Okay.
The matter. So, and I came out of school, and then I went to college for 3 years, and I didn't go to university. Went to art college for 3 years. Basically, I did like a basic art and design course for the first year because that's all I could get into because my grades were so bad.
Oh.
And after that, I did 2 years of like an audiovisual course, which was kind of like filmmaking. It was kind of like all aspects of filmmaking, but it was kind of like the course that you do before you go into filmmaking.
Right.
Into the proper filmmaking course. But I came out of that, and I just kind of so my first job was as an assistant to a cartoonist.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of like doing a bit of animation work, stuff like that. And I did that for a couple of years. But that really, I wasn't getting paid much. So I ended up doing other jobs. I was a postman for a while.
Okay.
And then winter came about, and I wasn't enjoying being in the rain. Really should get my portfolio together and try and get that job that I want to. I want to get into games. I worked and put a portfolio together, and then I just sort of spanned them out to a bunch of games companies in the UK that I kind of. Codemasters came back, and they offered me a job. So that was my first job, and that would have been in 2000 and so I worked at Codemasters for 5 years.
Hang on real quick. Remember, you worked at Codemasters for 5 years. Check your not noise gate, but your sensitivity. Make sure it's all the way down.
Oh, okay. Is it cutting off?
I couldn't tell if you were pausing a couple of times or if you were getting cut off. And I think
okay.
Because all I heard you say was 2000, and I didn't hear 2000 and what.
Oh, okay. So it must be cutting off. Right, I put it right down now.
Okay. All right. So go back to the year 2000. Yeah, go back to that point.
So my first, because I'm trying to remember what I got up to. So I from Codemasters, and so that was in 2003.
Okay.
That was as a UI artist. So my very first job was UI design. So I worked on a few projects there. Toca Race Driver 3 I did stuff for. Okay. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff at Codemasters actually, but the last one I worked on there was Operation Flashpoint 2.
All right.
Which was a military sim. But I quit for that, and there was a policy, I don't know if it's still there, but there's a policy where if you leave a company before the game ships, you don't get in the credits.
Ah.
So yeah, a bunch of my work's in that, but I'm not in the credits. I don't exist. But yeah, so after that, then I went for a bit because I kind of left and I was a little bit unsure where to go and what to do. I was a bit disgruntled, if I'm honest, about the games industry.
Right.
And I ended up at Real Time Worlds, which they were making a game called APB.
Oh yeah.
And so they were trying to get it out. It'd been in development for quite a while, and they were like, "We need the UI to be completely redesigned, and we need it done in a year." And so I came on as lead UI artist, and then had to get a team together. So I had to hire a bunch of other UI artists, and yeah, it was really just redo the entire UI for an MMO in a very short amount of time.
Wow.
And so yeah, that was. But I have to say, Real Time Worlds was a really good company to work for. Some really great people there, and my experience was that they treated you well. It's one of the only companies that I knew of that paid overtime.
Really?
Yeah. There's there's a lot of overtime in the games industry, but for a lot of the time, they paid overtime.
Yeah, most of them are kind of they're salary or based on the final product, right?
Yeah. And so yeah. So, but that all didn't work out, and eventually Real Time Worlds closed down, and I was only there for about a year just under 2 years. And so at that point, thought, okay, I've always wanted to make my own game. Now I thought, right, I'm going to go for it. So I started up a studio, and I pitched the game to a publisher, and they went for it, and so it got funding. And so for 2012, 2012, just the start of 2012. Was in development for about a year and a half, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But we got canned. It got shut down. We went over schedule.
Ooh.
It's one of those things where, in retrospect, I didn't know that I was agreeing to far too much work.
I see.
Agreeing to too much. I had pitched the game as a single player game. It was a single player, story driven side scroller, a bit like what I was aiming for at the time was platformer.
A platform.
So a bit like a modern Flashback. You remember Flashback in Another World?
No, I do not.
They're like these old side scrollers from the early days. I think Another World was the 90s.
Okay.
Flashback certainly was the 90s. And so it was kind of like doing a modern version of that, really. I'm trying to do a really nice side scroller. The game was a single player game, or it had been pitched to be a single player game. Publisher wanted it to have a multiplayer mode with an online, like a store for microtransactions and all this kind of stuff. Mistake was basically agreeing to that, really, because that workload of having to add a multiplayer mode and doing all the net code and all that kind of stuff, and then stuff that became more complicated just by adding those elements, just made us go over. And so that was the end of that, and difficult experience, and a huge amount of work. I mean, I was literally
like your dream was right there in your hands, and it just slipped away.
Yeah. But it's you learn from your mistakes. Because I had made mistakes in agreeing to too much, and responsibility for your own. You can't look at the publisher and say, oh well, what about their mistakes? Because they made mistakes as well, but but you can learn from your own mistakes, and then okay, I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
So that went down. That's when I also decided I wasn't going to go and get a job in the games industry and go and be an employee again. I didn't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
So I became a contractor in 2013, and that's when Infinitesimals was coming about. I thought, okay, more on my terms. So I'm not going to just jump into a deal with a publisher.
Okay.
I'm going to get the game to a certain level first before getting there, and then I can think about some point in the future, but I need to get the game to a certain level before that. But it's been a part-time thing up until very recently, because obviously you need income, you need money, you need to live. So I became a contractor and a consultant, and so I did a bunch of work. I mean, the most recent big title would have been Crackdown 3.
Really?
Yeah, I did consultancy on that.
Now, what do you mean? Like, what did you actually do?
Well, it was kind of a lot of it was FX stuff and pre-visualization. So kind of like concepts of what things could look like.
I see.
FX work as well, so kind of a little bit R&D for particle system type stuff. I think in terms of work that would be visible, I think the announcement stuff that came out, if it was announced, it's a while back now. It's got to be a couple of years ago, I think.
Right.
I think that would have been my explosions in that.
Really?
I think so. I'm trying to remember now. It's like when it was first announced and the destruction stuff. I think that would have been for that.
Right.
So that was kind of, but because I was deliberately keeping myself I wanted to keep myself independent as a contractor, so I just kind of just started taking work contracts here and there.
And while you're doing this, you are starting, like Infinitesimals is actually beginning. You're creating what was in the beginning a 2D side scroller.
Yeah. It would have probably a better description would have been a 3D side scroller.
Okay.
But yeah, I did like my initial concepts that I did. So I did some 2D animated concepts that were just 2D art animated, a bit more like silhouettes. But the only reason for them being 2D and the only reason for them to be silhouettes was just to they're quick to do, and I just wanted to give the idea of what the pod would be like with its cable legs and how it would move.
I see.
So it's kind of similar to what it's that idea again of previs and doing previs stuff to show what something will look like,
right?
Or to give the impression and an idea, to give an idea of what something will look like before you enter production, basically. Because I ended up doing a lot of that for work. Being something that I got hired for doing sometimes is doing previous stuff and concepts.
Right.
Like, what can something look like? Do a mock-up. So yeah, so Infinitesimals was a side thing, and it was just, you know, on the side. But then stuff and AAA stuff, I did a bit of both, and then in 2016, I would say, I did a FX pack for Unreal Engine called the Ballistics FX pack.
Wait, I saw those on your videos. You're the one that created that?
So that's kind of like...
You completely cut out. I didn't hear your answer.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did. Yeah. So that was something that I just kind of thought, I wonder if I make an FX pack that just does all the effects that a game would need for bullet impacts.
Right.
Area of particles and sound effects. So I did the sound effects for the impacts as well. And I thought,
that's amazing. I seen those videos and I thought you were just playing around with effects that Unreal Engine had, and you were seeing what would be suitable to use in your game. I had no idea you created that.
Yeah. So that was done as a experiment just to see a viable product, and could that bring income which could then fund the game.
Right.
That was the idea. So that went up for sale in 2016, sort of, I think it was May or something. And it's actually what then allowed me to hire a second team member.
Right.
So it's the money that I get from that. It's like, okay, I still need to work because I need to pay for myself. And from this pack every month will allow me to hire someone else. And so that's where Cameron Angus comes in, and he joined the project 2 years ago, or just over. It must be more than 2 years now.
Okay.
And Cameron joins the story, and he's on ever since, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, then it became two of us working on the game rather than just me.
Very awesome. So where does he have previous experience in game development?
He's got tons of experience programming, but he's not worked in the games industry much.
I see.
So I think he's got 20 years experience of programming, and so he's got a ton of experience, but he's not done loads in the games industry.
Right.
That's potentially a positive, I think, because the games industry is a little bit known for bad practice programming sometimes, like budget and Scarpa programming. Things are done because you're on a tight deadline. You end up just kind of
taking shortcuts. And,
yes,
and I tell you what, looking at your gameplay that you've been putting up, at what you're doing, you're not taking shortcuts at all.
No.
It's pretty. I mean, it is 100% evident that you're not taking a single shortcut. It's AAA quality. I know I said that in my video, but it looks AAA quality.
I mean, to me, when I look at it, I just see it. It looks unfinished. So much about it that is just placeholder, or I mean, a good example would be the level that we're building up now at the moment for the demo that we're building, to get things done quickly. For instance, the environmental, the architectural models that I'm building for it, you know, I just do box UV unwrapping for that, and then put I've built a bunch of materials that are kind of that are tileable, and they just kind of work reasonably well if you put them on a box unwrapped mesh. Now, I would never want to ship the final game like that for a lot of this stuff, but for now, it's a quick way of just getting stuff into a level and texturing it. Right. So it's kind of stuff like that. It's like, it doesn't look how I would want it to. And there's at the moment, so not enough assets that have been built yet to really flesh out levels as much as I want. So that's kind of in progress at the moment as well.
I see.
Still very much like, it feels to me like the final result will make this stuff look basic by comparison, I'm hoping anyway.
Hey, that's what I've noticed from your videos. If you start from the beginning, you're going to be mind blown how good it looks, and then as you go through, like I said, you've redone a lot of that stuff, and it looks even better. It's like, when I first started seeing those older videos, I'm like, this is amazing. And then you just go ahead and just outshine that old video with something new that you created of the same thing, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know it could get any better, but it did. It did. So I can see that being 100% true. Where did the idea come for the game?
So it goes back quite a long time, actually. It goes back, the original idea of a game where you play scale goes back probably about 20 years when I was in college.
Okay.
In the sense that it was more of a fantasy idea, or it evolved into more of a fantasy idea, in that it was more you played as a kind of a magical person or wizard, you could say, who could creatures.
You're cutting out again.
Yeah, so it started out more as a fantasy idea where you had that could control animals with his mind, but you were lying in the woods, injured, like critically injured, and so control the insects around you crawling over your own body and the other animals around, and protect your body from predators and from enemies. It would be that you heal, nurse your body and become healthier again so you could continue to live.
Right.
So that was kind of like one of the early ideas. Kind of merges with another idea that comes back from the college days, which was the idea of this of a kind of a mining platform in a game. This was a sci-fi setting where in these huge caverns there were these kind of mining platforms that would fire out cables and hang from the ceiling, and the way they moved around was by firing cables and then swinging to new locations and then firing the cables out and then anchoring themselves in a new spot. So it was a bit more kind of like punk would be the right thing, but it wasn't like ultra sci-fi, but it was a little bit more basic.
Right.
But the pod kind of came from that original idea, where for the idea of a vehicle that had limbs that were more like cables. You've probably seen in the early 2D animated mock-ups for the pod, there's one of them where it fires out cables into the world and swings around.
Yeah.
So that hasn't necessarily been removed from the game. It's just that's kind of become less of the focus. When it was a side scroller, The idea was more that it was going to be you run around and you fire the cables out and swing around, and kind of like a much more emphasis on that.
Right.
But as I was kind of going forward and thinking about it more, the legs became more. It wasn't just firing out cables. It was also on the cable legs, which were more like legs that, you know, actually had power rather than just firing out cables. It actually could support itself on the legs, and that's where the idea then became more, you know, muscular hydrostats. And I thought, well, it makes it a little bit of an interesting vehicle that's a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I, you know, like when I say you don't take shortcuts, instead of just making a vehicle with wheels, you decided to go with that, and that could not have been easy.
No. I mean, this is literally... So when Cameron joined the project, because I'd pretty much realized that build custom tools, like custom editor, the kind of stuff that I wanted to do. And so, like, a huge part of what Cameron's been working on is actually entirely custom editor suites inside Unreal Engine that are what we're doing. Because the whole skeletal animation system, and I've been using that for the bipedal stuff, and because that works well for that, and there's a lot of stuff that will be added on top of that.
Right.
But for the basics of a character running around, it's fine to use state machines and that kind of stuff. But for the vehicles and for the pod, that kind of thing would use it for that. But if we wanted to go down the route of fully simulated, so physically simulated, and then procedurally animated as well, so that it's very hard to do, but once it's done, we wanted it so that there's a lot of effects going on when you're using the vehicle. There are a lot of things that you can then kind of like make affect it, because you can have if you put it'll weigh more, and so it'll move more sluggishly, and that's just by virtue of the simulation, because you're putting more mass onto it.
I see.
A good example would be the enemies. So the idea would be, if you destroy one of the enemy's limbs and it loses power to it, you've destroyed whatever's, you could even blow a limb off, for instance. And so the idea will also be that you could, if it ended up with 2 limbs, it would have to be dragging itself along with those 2 limbs.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's like to make it more like a simulation of these vehicles. That's also the idea where there'll be components for these vehicles, so that you can damage components. And likewise with your vehicle, you'll have components in your vehicle as well that you can tinker with. So a great example would be Fighter game. That had elements of simulation, if you think about it, because you remember you used to be able to choose the power distribution coming from your spacecraft's power. More power to my shields, or I want more powers to my blasters.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing as well I'd like to include, so that you have a little bit of control over how you divvy out the power. And the pod's also going to be very customizable, in the sense that of the pod, what constitutes the pod is very much the cockpit. It's like the seat that you sit in.
Right.
But you can then build around that to add new things. So you could sit in the pod bay, and the idea will be that you can say, well, I want to make a combat pod. Instruments that you choose, when it constructs the pod around you, it will put parts that are more like heavily armored and have got weaponry on them, and it sticks a turret on the top. Whereas if you say, well, actually no, I want to be stealthy and have a lot of sensors, could have a version that's not very heavily armored and doesn't have a lot of weapons, but it will move around a lot faster and can, say, have more stealthy aspects. So
wow,
it's customizable.
that's really awesome. Another thing that I saw on your YouTube channel is that it looks like you compose all of the music. Is that true?
So it's so what it is so I will be doing all of the music, and some of the tracks that were some of the work in progress stuff that I put up has my tracks in it, but at this stage I don't have a lot of time other than just to work on moment. So I do use temp tracks as well. So there's a lot of temp tracks in there. If sometimes I just post up an in progress thing, I'll just put a temp track in there just as it's early days. For the final result, obviously I'll be doing all the music. But I mean, a good example is the 2 most recent progress reels that I put up on YouTube.
Right.
I just licensed the track for that. I used a library music. Because for now, I don't want to have to spend a couple of days writing a track when there's more important things to do.
Yeah. What about the ones that say that original soundtrack, OST? Is that you, or is that just licensing in a song?
If it's on YouTube and it's got OST, and it'll be mine.
Amazing stuff, dude. Amazing. So, I mean,
yeah.
your artwork is just absolutely brilliant. The game that you're making actually looks like a AAA title. Your music for those 2 that I seen on there, 2 or 3 that say OST, I was blown away at that music.
It's again one of those things where I feel like they were kind of concept tracks more than anything. Like they may or may not end up in the game.
Right.
And some of them were done, back at the start when I was more in the kind of the conceptual stage. What do I want the music to sound like? So, right. Yeah, it's just to kind of give an idea of thinking. I'm definitely thinking it will be an orchestral soundtrack. It might have elements that have other elements in there, like synth elements in there as well.
Uh-huh.
But kind of want to aim for something that's a little bit like, there's kind of a trend nowadays but game has it as well, where everyone kind of is trying to sound like Hans Zimmer. Fine, I like Hans Zimmer, but it's kind of ended up with, I feel, when you listen to, say, a soundtrack composed by Jerry Goldsmith, okay, back in the day, or right, Alan Silvestri, even think about soundtracks like even just like the original Predator. It's got a real character to the soundtrack that is quite unique in a way. Like the way listen to the Predator soundtrack,
right?
It sounds very Predator. It's really to kind of like, you could hear Alan Silvestri in it, because obviously when you listen to Alan Silvestri stuff, there's his signature.
Right.
But I kind of find with a lot of music nowadays, with a lot of film soundtracks, when I listen to them, I used to be able to do where I'd like watch a film, and then I would hear the soundtrack and I go, that, or oh, that's a Jerry Goldsmith score, because they had a very unique voice.
Yes.
They had just the way that it was orchestrated, and it was their style, I suppose you could say. And I feel like there's a lot of modern film music lacks that character.
Okay.
And so what I would like to do is if possible, is try and get something in the game where it feels like it has that kind of vibe, where it has a strong theme, because that's something like is a little bit out of fashion as well, as having a theme that's very noticeable and that you could
very
like
true.
Say it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's more like, no, we want something a little bit more ambient, like we don't really want you to notice it. But I think especially for games as well, like these games that I used to play where the music is kind of like in my head because it was just so memorable, and like the scenes as well that you had in the game. Like you would go to a certain part of the game, and that part of that environment perhaps had a theme, and you'd kind of, it would become part of the character of the level, and thing like the Donkey Kong game on the SNES, like each, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's not to say you can't have, and stuff, because sometimes you need that. But I think that's what I would like to aim for. I would like to aim for something a little bit where character to the sound, and some themes that, you know, for characters and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more traditional in that sense, I guess.
Yeah. No, I get it. I totally get it. And from what I've seen so far, I mean, you're nailing it. But, you know, just like before, I think it's wonderful, but then all of a sudden you come out with something that completely trumps it. So it's like, all right, I'm just going to sit here and watch this space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I interviewed a developer a long time ago about a game he was making where it was a survival game where he was really a character that was really small. And I asked him, I said, well, how big is the map? And then he goes, about the size of your backyard. And I'm like, at first I thought, yeah, that's pretty small. And he goes, yeah, but you got to remember, you're really tiny. So yeah. How big is your map? Like, what do you foresee? I mean, you probably don't know yet, but what do you foresee? Like, how big of an environment are we going to be able to explore and play this story out in?
So what I've been kind of thinking about recently is that rather than one huge open world, will kind of be that there's a bunch of mini open worlds, and one of the reasons for this, like, because technically we could just make one huge open world. It's not, you know, impossible,
right?
But there's several factors here in that. One, I feel kind of the scale we're working at as well. Kind of looking environments, and they're not going to be like absolutely, I'm not going for full realism, because otherwise you're talking about grass lawns that are just like the same thing for miles. You know, like,
right,
it's just grass. Yeah, and that's not going to be much fun to be in. So you know, you have to dial back those and actually design levels that interest over full realism. But as long as they need to be believable. But in terms of just giving variety of environment types, we're just putting you in someone's back garden. There is a lot you can do with that, but I would like the player to sort of have to sort of in areas in the world, potentially different climates.
Okay.
So making that all one world would just be where you couldn't do it. Go for, you know, I want to go from snow to desert. That's probably not going to work out in an open world sense at this scale in a reasonable.
Right. Yeah, that'd be one heck of a travel time.
Yes. Now you could just, you know, a lot of games have this point. Even if you look at something like Breath of the Wild, they handle that kind of stuff. It's not realistic because you would go from desert to snow very rapidly.
Right.
Kind of get away with it. The game gets away with it. There's a stylistic side that allows you to get away with it as well, I think.
So are we going to see ourselves in a situation where all of a sudden, you know, the game takes you to a place where you're in a backyard and we see a lawnmower that's not being used and you have to go inside the lawnmower to fight something? Are we going to see something like on that scale?
I don't know if it probably wouldn't be a lawnmower.
No, just as an example, like, you know,
yeah.
maybe something runs inside of a soda can that's just thrown into the yard. You go in there and kill it. Just examples like that. So are we going to see like real items and stuff like that in this environment?
So you mean basically, are we going to get to see human-made stuff and get to go inside it and stuff?
Pretty much, yeah.
So it's still a little bit up in the air in that regard, because one of the early kind of like the ideas was to show nature, and it's very much about putting you in the wilderness, and so the focus was more on at these scales and the creatures that you would meet out in nature. That said, even right back at the start, I did have of the aliens building a facility that was inside someone's house, inside a human's house. Whether that will be in the first game or the first release or whatever you want to call it, I don't know yet.
Okay.
It's a scope thing. It's one of those things where I don't want to promise it, because there's just two of us at the moment, and there's already big plans for just the wilderness side of it, and that's
right.
A lot of work there. Well,
you're 1 millimeter tall, so if you were stuck out into even a small patch of woods, and with a little puddle, I mean that's a very large playing area. Huge.
So one of the big ones I'm thinking would be like a pond.
Right. Yeah.
But some also, or sort of the pond and the shoreline of a pond, but then also all the area around that. That, for instance, it provides quite a lot of variety.
Yeah.
And so after this prototyping period, which will be coming to an end early next year, and then we'll be looking into sort of proper starting up production and getting a team go on the game.
Wow.
And what happens there will kind of decide the scope a little bit.
Okay.
Of how big the first thing will be able to be constructed, because I tried to just do the grand vision. I mean, see you in 20 years, basically.
Yeah, right.
For two people, it's just like it's far too much to chew off. But but I think but even just making the slice that I'm thinking is still hugely ambitious. So, but it's doable.
Right.
All within a reasonable time frame,
Right. So speaking on scale and map size and stuff like that, I saw like it was one of your recent videos where you were showing that you were controlling a spaceship out in space, and you could see a planet on the horizon. Is there going to be space gameplay?
So that's really comes down to next year, and yeah, it's the big question of what we're certainly not going to try and do is compete with or No Man's Sky, level of you just go everywhere you want, go and land wherever you want. It would just be far too much work.
Exactly. But if you're 1 millimeter tall and you're trying to create Earth, and if you ever do make Earth as a free roam, that's more than enough of gameplay and biomes than you could ever want from any other game. I mean, that's such a large playing area, and if you did include space, maybe just the moon. Maybe some space dogfights out there. You wouldn't have to do the whole star system.
Oh, no, I think that's much more realistic. So I think what I was thinking is at the start of the game, you're in space.
Yeah.
So I wanted to cover the transition from space to Earth.
Okay.
Now you don't necessarily, you're not going to say get full control over where you land on Earth, because scope is just insane.
Right.
Freedom would just be like making the whole Earth at this scale, or doing it in a way that you'd have to do it with a bunch of procedural stuff.
Yeah.
And just it's again just not taking on too much for the first game. It's just trying to be sensible and making something that's really good at what it does, but not
Right.
trying to be too grand for the first game. And so I think being in space initially and having some gameplay out in space, because the pod is built for space as well. You see the little pod with the cable legs. It's going to have, you can of course be able to construct elements onto it. Choose parts that would then have thrusters, and it can, because part of the pod it always has been that the pod is kind of used for servicing spaceships as well. So it's kind of like you have the big spaceship, and the pods are scurrying on the outside of it using their cable legs to keep them anchored to it.
Oh wow.
And they can repair things. That's what they use to kind of like do EVAs.
Yeah, that's really cool, man.
So
really cool.
There'll be some space stuff. There always was a plan to have at the start some space stuff, and then you end up on Earth, and because I really want to show that transition of game. Obviously, people will know because they know what the game's about, but kind of like
right.
You won't necessarily initially know that the scale that you're at.
Yeah.
And then you end up on Earth, and then you climb out and you look up and you're like, oh.
Right. And how cool is it that you're an alien coming into Earth, and you're so small that Earth doesn't even know it's being visited by an alien.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
coming right through the atmosphere, down onto the planet. Even a complete invasion, they probably wouldn't even know. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So let's go down the list here. And I know this is a weird question, but I usually ask this. Do you have any plans for multiplayer or co-op?
No.
Okay.
No. I think, and this is purely because my lessons learned from my previous project and how trying to do multiplayer and trying to take on the scope of doing a full single player game and a multiplayer game too much. And because this project's so ambitious in the first place, just in terms of some of the things we're trying to do with it, to try and then add multiplayer to that, I think it would be the death of the project, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
I don't argue with you there. I mean, this definitely looks like a very well thought out single player game.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I thought about multiplayer, and it's something that I would, maybe if things go well, and I mean, because I would like to. It's like I said, this is really just focusing on a thin slice of the story that I have in mind. The story arc that is kind of already pretty well mapped out of like the big events starts right back at the aliens' home world and their civilization and all of the events that are going on there. There's a whole story there that I would like to do.
Oh wow.
And so tackled in stages. If we had the budget of some of these big companies, that would be totally different. You could tackle this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for a tiny two-man team, and even then, hopefully, next year get some more people on. But even with just more people, it's still just the kind of thing that you need to keep the scope down.
Have you ever thought about doing a Kickstarter? I've seen games get funded that your game is like 10 levels above, 100 levels above.
I think I'm just apprehensive for two reasons. The first would be, I suppose I've seen a lot of the Kickstarter fatigue, a bit fed up with and annoyed with Kickstarters, and things go wrong and people can be a little bit cynical about them. Yeah, there's been a lot of that, but and it's some people have really ruined it, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's kind of a similar reason to why I haven't gone with any publishing route at the moment. Despite being offered it, I've been offered contact from companies wanting to get involved and everything, and I've just told everyone at the moment I'm not ready for that yet. We just need to get some more stuff done first. Don't want to rush into this. Kickstarter's kind of the same deal, really. I wouldn't rule it out fully. It's an option that we would take. I would like the game to be at a certain level first.
Right.
Certain unknowns need to be solved first. Like, it's kind of one of those things. Like, you enter into a Kickstarter, you obviously have to give a delivery date.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what I tell like all the people. Like when the game's in development and they haven't announced a release date, don't pressure them to. Like I don't want developers to actually say, "Hey, we're going to release this on this date," because for me, I kind of feel like the developers are going to reach a point where they're going to have to take shortcuts or cut things out just to make that deadline.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the reality of games anyway. There's always a lot of that you end up sort of, okay, what are we committing to? I mean, I've had to do this on this project, and like I say, had the original grand vision. I've had to kind of go, right, well, actually, realistically, going to have to make this part of the grand vision first.
Yeah. And
so it's a similar kind of thing. It's over ambition is, I want to make things that are ambitious, have some like a level of sanity where you look back and go that you have to cut off a certain amount of ambition that's done. Choose quality over quantity in terms of scope as well. So right. I want to make something big as the grand vision that I originally wanted to make, but make something a little bit more focused for the first game, and get something out there that people really like, hopefully, and has an audience, and then you can go from there.
Yeah. We did briefly talk about vehicles. You talked about the dropship, flying vehicles. Well, the dropship is a flying vehicle. The pod, and there's also something really curious: riding on the back of a fly.
Yeah.
So what other type of vehicles? And I got to say, the dropship is probably the coolest thing I've ever seen. Right? It looks like a dragonfly or a bird even, and just the physics look like they're pretty realistic.
Yeah. So the dropship is kind of there's definitely a little bit of a dragonfly influence there, although you'll probably see the art direction point of view. I was very keen to stay away from, for the aliens, I wanted all of their vehicles more like aircraft and vehicles.
Okay.
Like so even the dropship, it has elements really that it's more like an aircraft in the way that it's designed. Rather than looking, say, like a robotic dragonfly, where it's got bug eyes, but metal bug eyes, and do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not. Yeah. I didn't want them to look literally like mechanical insects. I wanted to completely stay away from that. So, yeah, the dropship is definitely, obviously, because it's got the 4 wings and it can flap them, so it has an element of inspiration from that. But the way that the wings are actually designed, they're not like dragonfly wings; they're more like airplane wings.
I see.
So it's kind of more wanting to look like these are designed by engineers rather than like when designs for robots that look too much like a metallic version of something that exists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I find it's a bit kind of like a lost opportunity to try and do something a bit different. Not trying to follow something organic and just make a metal version of it or whatever.
Right.
Sorry, carry on.
So and the flies as well. You could jump onto a back of a fly and fly that around. And so of the things that we're gonna see in the game, like I seen a picture. You had an ant and then there's the flies. So what kind of enemies, natural enemies, are we going to have, like Earth enemies?
So the main enemies that you're going to be coming up against are not going to be the Earth enemy, the Earth creatures. They're going to be sort of a little bit more passive in the sense that into a particular sticky situation with them, they're not going to be coming for you to hunt you down.
Okay.
Part of the reason that is because I'm kind of sympathetic towards the creatures. I like insects, and so I didn't want to make a game where it's like the objective was to just destroy insects, you know.
I see.
So it's full with the enemy hunter-gatherer machines that are going to be aggressive, and if they spot you, they're going to want to kill you. Either kind of the main antagonist that if you couldn't come across an insect, and if you really don't like them, you can kill them. You get into a scrap with them. So that's not going to be an option, but it's something where it's like, here's a mission, go and kill 50, you know.
Right. It wouldn't make sense if you're able to take down these mechs or whatever they are that trying to squash your face and not be able to kill an ant. So you obviously had to at least make them destructible as well, but not a focus on destroying.
Yeah, you'll be able to kill them if you come across them and that's the path you want to take. You can obviously just shoot every single one that you come across. That's but it's not something that it's kind of, you're in a way you're kind of wasting your ammunition, really. They're not your threat.
Right. So we're not gonna be carried away by an ant or maybe even pecked at by a bird.
So see, that's a little bit different in the sense that I mean, I think
I'm sorry, what was that?
I have thought a lot about how to cover the interactions with things like for instance, if we put a bird in the game, you know, would they come down and try and eat you, for instance?
Right.
And so that's again, that is a little bit up in the air. That's something of the full scope of that kind of thing. Impossible to do, and I'm not against it from a game design point of view. So it really comes down to, do we get a chance to go to that level for, say, having a humongous bird come in and acting in that manner?
Right.
It's kind of unknown at this point whether we would have that for the first game.
I see. Okay, I see. And what are those speaking of enemies, you have like these energy drones. Am I saying that right? I forget what you call them.
Energy drones.
Yeah, you show them. They got like these red trails, and they come after you.
Oh yes, sorry, the Stinger drones.
Stinger drones. Yes, sorry.
Yes, yes. So they're kind of, you can kind of think of them as more from a hunter-gatherer. They would launch them, and they would just come after you.
Okay, I see.
They're kind of like a bit of a wild missile strike. See, part of the kind of the thing I'm aiming for with the vehicle combat is making it a little bit like a combination of armored warfare and air warfare. So you have countermeasures, and so let's say you're fighting a hunter-gatherer, you might be faster than him, but he's got a lot more firepower and he's heavier armored, and you would have active defense launchers as well. So the active defense launchers will kind of sensor controlled little turrets that can shoot down incoming projectiles, but they have a limit and they can be overwhelmed and they can be distracted. Kind of trying to add a little bit of tactical gameplay there, where if you want to destroy a hunter-gatherer, it's not going to be something like they're kind of like the really big ones are in a way. And if you want to bring them down, there's certain things you need to do to first, so that you can get your heavier like you couldn't just call an artillery strike down onto it, because they would, if you haven't touched them yet, they're going to have their active defense launchers, and they'll just shoot them all down.
Right.
But if you can get in and use fast, use your cannon and other smaller weapons and target their defense launchers and damage them, and you open up spaces in their defenses to then fire some missiles at them, for instance, that will then get through, and you'll be able to do some more damage.
All right, very awesome. Okay, so like, this is a really dumb question, but like, well, I should ask you if, instead of saying, the question is, will this be released on consoles in the future? You probably don't know that. But would you is that something that you would like to see?
Oh, definitely. I think you'd be limited by specifications a little bit. Like, I don't think you'd be able to run the game on the Switch. I think it would just be for a Switch, for instance. But I think they're much more capable of running it. It really comes down to things like, because of the physical animation stuff we're doing, that just requires a little bit more processor power than that. You need a little bit more of a baseline of power there to do this kind of stuff, because you're running physics calculations to do this stuff. And so there's just a little bit more cost there. And I think that's figuring in things like the graphics, and I don't want to aim for I think trying to run that and then make it look good on a Switch wouldn't work. Right. Now, I have heard that, there's the rumors that there's going to be a Switch Pro coming out, so you never know that if that's, bumped up the specs a bit, then maybe that's an option. But I think like certainly the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X will have the power, I would imagine.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, it's up in the air at this point. I think the plan is to focus on PC first, and again to limit scope, and just so we're not having to add more work to our plate.
Right.
So I think to do a console version, they're two very different control schemes. You have the mouse and the keyboard, and then you have the game pads. I would prefer to focus on PC first and make full use of the controls that are available to a PC player. Compromises, because like if you want to then just make the game for both and launch at the same time, having to make UI considerations that work for both control schemes, and you do end up with compromises there, I think. Whereas I think what I would prefer to do is get a PC version out, make it as good as we can. If there is then a demand for a console version, you can then focus and kind of control scheme then that really suits the console and the strengths of a console, and make it work for that in that approach.
I see. So
certainly would like to.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, is this going to be like its own launcher, or maybe on Steam?
Oh, that's very unknown at this point.
I see.
It's all because obviously it's a little bit of Steam suddenly got a little bit of potential competition coming from Epic.
Yeah, I know. I've seen that.
How that will pan out is we'll find out.
Right.
I think it would be nice to see another competitor that does well. It would be nice to see that just from a drives, people to improve themselves. So I do think Steam probably does take too much of a cut.
Right.
So if it forces Steam to take their cut down a little bit, that I think would be really positive.
I agree. I agree totally. So I'd like to end the conversation with asking you, like, I like asking this to developers, because it seems like they like to talk about this, because there's always like difficulties in making a game. And usually when people interview a developer, no one asks them, like, what's been the difficulties? What's been the most difficult part of this journey? And I'm always, maybe it's just me, but I'm always super interested in hearing what the difficulties were, how you overcame them, things like that. So what is the most difficult thing you, or annoying thing or difficult thing you had to overcome?
I mean, I think Cameron would be in full agreement with this as well. I think it's the physical animation stuff.
Okay.
That's
pretty tedious.
I don't know if tedious is the right word, but no, Cameron probably would say it's tedious actually. But there's just been so much iteration time on it. Also, you make a change that because you're animating with forces as opposed to where everything's kinematic, you make one change and it will suddenly have a knock-on effect. I mean, just changing the mass or the center of mass of something's body moves, and it can suddenly make it unstable, and then you need to then fix that. And then also, as we've added more things to it over time, you get it to a certain level and it seems to be working well, and then you add another element to the simulation or another, and it will break everything, and it's like, oh, it can't even stand up now. To then iterate on that to then get it to, so it takes those new factors into account. Even like, so the fly is quite a recent one, and when I was working on the fly and getting him moving around, tilting over to one side, it's like he had and I couldn't figure out why it was doing it.
Huh.
And it just ended up being that the collision mesh was slightly lopsided. The center of mass was slightly to one side, and so he just had a tendency to list over. And I was trying to adjust the forces. Every time he flaps a wing, I'm applying a force upwards, and trying to do and so it was just then, okay, go back in, adjust the collision mesh so that it's a little bit more accurate,
right?
And so it's not quite off center, and now he's not got this tendency to sort of veer to one side slightly. Is obviously accommodating that anyway, but it just removed that problem, and it just like hunting that down, just time consuming, and there are a lot of elements involved that can kind of break things, and you're like, what's happened? I don't even know why that's happening.
It's like, what happened now?
yeah. So it's that stuff really, because it's complex. And the second thing I think is just the team size. Do everything ourselves, it just adds to the workload, where even just if you had to just do one of these roles, it would just be it's a lot of work, but then it's just juggling, it's spinning plates and you have to do a lot of stuff. It's why things aren't as far along as I would like. I find it very frustrating. I find it very frustrating that I'm 5 years into this and we are where we are. Cost that came from being independent.
Right.
Years ago, I could have just taken one of the funding offers, but I would have lost IP ownership.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I didn't want to go down that route, because I've gone down that route before and it all went wrong.
Right. Right.
It was kind of like I wouldn't ever, get the game to a certain. The game's got to get to a certain point before I even consider that kind of stuff, and before thinking about Kickstarter. But I do think, is when, like, next year we'll make an announcement trailer and start showing things more, and hopefully get out there a little bit, because nobody really knows about the game. It's just, completely unknown at this point, because there's not been much promotion.
It's starting to gain traction. It really is. Like, yeah, I think I don't know how I ran across your game. I ran across it like I think a year ago, and I don't know if it was on IndieDB. Are you on there?
Yes.
Ah, that's where I found it then. Yeah, it was like a year ago I found it. Completely forgot about it. And then one of my awesome subscribers was like, Cobra, you should take a look at this game. And I clicked the link and I'm like, I know what this is. I forgot all about this. And I went back to your YouTube channel and you had so many more videos up there. And I had fun going through them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got faster this last year. Things have accelerated. I think it's just having time to work on it has helped. Not just, previously I was just working full time because I needed to earn the money, and
right.
But it was getting that pack out. It was just a gamble, but it kind of literally was the beginning of changing everything. It allowed me to bring Cameron on, and having two people working on the project then, and also bringing on Cameron's expertise as well, because he's a much better programmer than I am in terms of like he's doing all the the custom editors and stuff. I mean I would never be able to do that. That's like completely out of the scope of what I can do. And so that's really, I think, was the turning point is and then also starting to just where I could work on this, devote more hours to the game and start working on it, and not just be this thing that I had to do on the side,
right?
Which, even though I was working a lot of hours, don't get me wrong, because I'm a complete workaholic and my wife hates it because she barely sees me. But than having to work on it in the evenings and weekends, I can work on it in the day.
Yeah.
That's I think helped as well in that regard, where certain things are starting to come more together, and you can actually say, oh, it actually looks like a game now rather than a bunch of little tech demos.
Right. It looks amazing. So, yeah, dude. You're doing such a good job.
Well, it's good to hear, because it's been a long road, and I certainly haven't lost faith in working on it and that kind of stuff. But it's like there's a kind of a feeling of just like I really just see this progress faster than it has been, and I think next year it will, because I think that we will start getting more people on to help, and that's going to then free up just specs where, rather than I've kind of had to do stuff that I didn't really want to do, like building props and stuff. That's kind of the kind of stuff I want to be able to hand off to other people, really.
Yeah. And you'll be able to expand more on what you want, like instead of taking on more than what you guys can chew at the moment, you'll be able to say, okay, now we can do this, now we can do that. And that's what I hope for you. I really hope that turns out that way.
Yeah, it's like, don't get me wrong, because over the period of the last 3 years, I did hire occasionally some contractors here and there to help out with things. Like one of the hunter-gatherer models, I'd sketched, I'd done the concept art for it, and I hired a guy called Stefano. He came on and he did the model for it, and it saved me it's that kind of thing. I want to be able to do more of that, so just to get things going.
Yeah.
So I can focus on the core gameplay stuff and the core environment art and the things that I want to be able to focus on. So yes, hopefully next year, that's when things will pick up.
Yeah, for sure. Whenever you want to come back on the show here and talk about development updates and stuff like that, or once you get a release date and you want to come, and mention it, just message me. I'll pull you right on the show in a heartbeat.
Perfect. I mean, it should. I think the plan is basically early next year we'll have the kind of the core prototype stuff done. And, we'll be hopefully then working on an announcement trailer, and I think that might be then a good point to sort of send that your way and see what you think, and then that might be a good jumping off point.
Very awesome, dude. Very awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on and talking
Thanks
about
for having me.
Infinitesimals. No, it's my pleasure. I mean, yeah, it's my pleasure having you on, dude. It's just, this game's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So let's get out there and let's try and spread the word on this and get more people to turn their head toward it.
Yeah. Hopefully see how things go. And yeah, like I say, just thanks so much for having us on. It's just first scoop in terms of voice interview, at least.
Very awesome.
I have had some text interviews, but I think you're the first scoop in that regard. So yeah.
Very awesome, buddy. Hey, good luck, guys, man. I'm gonna keep paying attention.